So we're going to start with Richard, who is going to introduce whatever he's going to introduce. Richard Barbrook.
Okay, thanks. Okay, at the University of Westminster, one of the things I do is teach on modules where we look at the rights of man and citizen. And so one of the things I want to do today while we kick off is just think about actually how do we get to the concept of having bills of rights. They're associated with the modernising revolutions of the 17th and 18th and 19th century. So if you think about the key bills of rights that are usually quoted, the English 1689 Bill of Rights, the French 1789 Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, and the USA's 1791 Bill of Rights, which was then incorporated as amendments into the Constitution. And these, protect these basic ideas, which are now under threat. These ideas like, about media freedom, particularly personal privacy, fair trial, religious toleration, these are still questions. But when we think about how they were originally developed, they weren't for everybody. They were actually for white male property owners. I mean, famously, the US Bill of Rights, 1791 Bill of Rights, was written by a slave owner. So what you have is that people without property, women and African slaves who were property, were outside their protection. Over the last 2 centuries, what's happened is this sort of oligarchic concept of rights has actually been extended to all adults. If you look, especially after the Second World War, with the Allies' victory over fascism, you get the UN passing the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and of course what's still controversial in this country, the 1950 European Convention on Human Rights, which basically says everybody is adults are entitled to these rights. What was the big debate then, and I think is one thing that I want to I think we should flag up in our present discussion, is that there was when they were actually drawing them up, there was an argument between the left and the right over whether they should move from political and civil rights to also socio-economic rights. At the time, these were blocked. But there was a long tradition of this. In the French Revolution, the Jacobins in their 1793 declaration said everybody will get, basically the Republic will provide for everyone. And particularly during the Second War, US President Roosevelt said we need a new Bill of Rights that would include employment, housing, healthcare, education and pensions for all. This was vetoed at the time, but there's actually a 1966 International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights drawn up by the United Nations, which almost no one reads today. But I think we could probably draw some ideas from this. The reason for this lack of interest in doing it comes out at the end of the Cold War. So during the Cold War, the Soviet Union actually itself portrayed itself as the defender of not just political and civil rights, but also socio-economic rights. In the famous 1936 Constitution, there actually is a very impressive list of the fundamental rights and duties of citizens. But of course, in practice, this didn't happen. It was, in fact, what was seen is that the call for socio-economic rights justified the removal of political and civil rights. They would say, well, you can't have political and civil rights because we still haven't yet got the condition where we can guarantee everybody housing and employment and all the rest of it. And so in a sense it was a mystification. So especially in the 1970s and 1980s, when the dissidents were campaigning against the Stalinist tyrannies in Eastern Europe and Russia, they dropped this and said, well, actually what's happened by extending rights, we've actually undermined their most basic idea, which is individual freedom, to protect individual freedom from state tyranny. And so at the end of the Cold War, into the 1990s and 2000s, it was seen that the only type of freedom is political and civil rights, that liberalism and democracy are synonymous. Of course, now we're in a situation where we can see, particularly with the revelations of Edward Snowden and other people, that actually these rights themselves are under attack. I mean, the KGB with industrial technologies could own, and it was very well funded, but only a minority of the population was under surveillance. Even the Stasi in East Germany, which had some incredible percentage of the population, like 5% of the population was employed by it. It took up a huge amount of the resources, but even they were only looking at a minority of the population. Now we have the NSA and it's all the other alphabet agencies of the American Empire are trying to look at, collect everybody's emails, texts, downloads, social media postings, all of it, collect all of it, and as we just were talking earlier on, if you have machine translation, it doesn't matter what language you do it, they can find out what it is. And of course, this is actually unconstitutional, according to American law, under the 1791 Bill of Rights. The Fourth Amendment of the Constitution is a clause in that which says you can only have your personal communications intercepted under exceptional circumstances authorised by a judge. Now, obviously, this protection has disappeared, and the panic caused by the Al-Qaeda attacks and this sort of state of permanent war on terror has allowed the American government to basically, they have courts that say you are conforming to the Fourth Amendment. We all know they're not. So what we see, ironically, is whereas during the Cold War, at the end of the Cold War, people said if you demand socio-economic rights, you won't get political and civil rights. Now we've got a stage where by denying socio-economic rights, it's also justified the removal of political and civil rights. This is something that should make us question about the foundation of what we think a Bill of Rights should be. I mean, part of the reason why the NSA can get away with this is obviously because the internet itself is very easy to survey people. If you think about it, one the NSA has done is piggyback on the dominance of companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft and all the rest of these people on Twitter to actually be able to either with their collaboration like Microsoft or not, as with Google, get this information. But they already are surveying us because they need it, for targeted advertising, customer relations, analysing markets. And so obviously for them, they say, well, if they're gathering this information anyway, let's us gather it too, because we can then find out who our enemies are, real and imagined. And because all of us are potentially an enemy of the American empire, the whole planet's population, everybody's communication should be targeted surveillance. Now, one of the solutions put forward, particularly by neoliberals, is that we can use encryption. But I say, well, I think one of, encryption for the masses. And obviously this is a way forward, though. I have friends who say if you use encryption, all you're doing is flagging up to the NSA that you're worse looking at your communications. But there's more than this. The Snowden leaks have shown how they've managed to compromise almost all hardware and software security. And every week another revelation comes about the spooks have got into our basement. But I think there's also something even deeper than that, which is it puts into question the original version of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights assumes this autonomous white male property owner. So the famous example, which was inspiring, we had another meeting the other week, another meeting that I had with Tom, and they had a big portrait of Charles James Fox, who was a great Whig leader of the late 18th century. And one of the things the Whigs always used to say is the Englishman's home is his castle. The reason why your personal communications is because everybody, if you have property, you have autonomy within your little sphere. Of course, this doesn't really fit very well with how we use the internet, because we're always sharing information with each other, with total strangers. I mean, if you want to find out where to go, you're using your GPS, which can then track you where you're going. You're continuously accessing it. So in a sense, what we have to think about is whether this idea of the atomised individual who needs rights to collectively organise, to collaborate with each other, is actually still going. And whether when we think about how to write a new Bill of Rights, how we can actually bring in this sort of sharing, collaborative part of the internet without sacrificing some of these basic rights which were fought for hundreds of years ago. So I think one of the things we want to do is open up a debate. I mean, obviously, people need to be able to share knowledge, knowing that it's confidential, and to have informed consent when other people access it, except in exceptional circumstances. But also because this collaboration is part of creating a sort of, a new economy, a really new economy, not a sort of neoliberal free market, but a proper collaborative economy. So like its liberal and socialist predecessor, this new Bill of Rights could set the rules of the game for the internet in the 21st century. I think we need to have a way of collectively regulating our individual online activities in the common interest. So what we'd like to do is call for constructing this new vision, this digital citizenship, so we can actually make our own contribution towards building a truly human civilization. Thank you.